And welcome. I'm Gina Cheverine, Managing Vice President of Greater Cleveland Partnership. I want to thank you to Aaron Mann for sponsoring this session, and of course, thank you to Team NEO for inviting me to serve as the moderator of this session, Building an Equitable and Inclusive Culture in the Workplace. I'm honored to be here because this is a topic that I am very passionate about. As part of the Greater Cleveland Partnership's Equity and Inclusion Division, I talk every day to business leaders about their role and responsibility in dismantling systemic racism. There are a lot of leaders out there who know the importance of this work and are committed to changing. They just don't know where to start. So at GCP, we offer resources, assessments, best practices, and workshops to help employees create equitable and inclusive environments in their organization. We also see great examples of organizations that are doing this work, and today we get to hear from a few of them firsthand. So we'll start with doing some introductions of the panelists, and then we'll dive right in because I know they have a lot to share. So I want to start with Yentil Rawlinson, Director, Inclusion and Diversity at Sherwin-Williams. We'll move on to Aaron Grossman, Founder and CEO of Alliance Solutions, and then Earl Major, Vice President of Human Resources at Delta Dental. So Yentil, let's start with you.
Awesome. Well, hello, everyone. I am Yentil Rawlinson, and I have the honor of serving as the Head of Diversity and Inclusion for Sherwin-Williams. In this role, I am able to set the global strategy for how do we build equity into our systems, tools, and processes around, as well as align on how do we truly make sure our people feel like they belong and our people feel like they can grow and can develop and engage within our culture as a company. So definitely is an honor. I've been in this role for almost 2 years, where we've rolled out education and training programs, enhanced our employee resource groups, as well as we have an amazing commitment from our CEO that really reinforces kind of our stance in creating this equitable work environment.
Thank you, Yentil, and it's great to see you. And I had the opportunity to meet Yentil when she first came on, and I know that Sherwin is really committed to this work. So I'm excited to have you and hear the conversation. So we'll move on to Aaron.
Good morning. My name is Aaron Grossman, and I am the founder and CEO of Alliance Solutions Group, which is powered by the Talent Launch Network, which I also am the owner of. And Talent Launch is a nationwide network. It's wholly owned of independently operated staffing and recruitment companies. And we're now the 150th largest employment agency in the United States, headquartered here in Cleveland, Ohio. So really excited about that. And one of the reasons why I'm here today and I'm excited to be a part of this is that our purpose at our company is to motivate the world to realize its potential. And I think there is so much unlocked potential around this topic and really creating a diverse and inclusive workforce. And we work with hundreds of companies here in our community in Northeast Ohio. And I want to be an advocate for this type of change and this type of movement so that we can unlock the power of our community. So thank you for letting me be here.
Well, welcome. And, I think that's a really important point that I hope we get to unpack a little bit more is that potential and really bringing that and everybody's voice into the room and into the workplace. So Earl, a little bit about you.
Thank you, Gina. My name is Earl Major. I'm presently Vice President, Head of Human Resources for Delta Dental of Michigan, Ohio, and Indiana. Cleveland is a big market for us, and so playing in that space is very important to us. I joined the company in January of this year, and if you can imagine, riding the wave of a pandemic, civil unrest, and economic chaos all at the same time has been challenging, but at the same time, Delta is a great company. And we are looking forward to, we're in the process actually of kickstarting again, an inclusion and diversity program. And the premise behind it is that it's not enough just to become the best version of yourself, but you need to be able to bring your whole self to the workplace. And the ability to do that hinges on having a strong inclusion effort in addition to just being a diverse company. So we're looking forward to growing in that space.
Great. And Yeah, I'm glad that you started out by talking about kind of the dual pandemics that we have going on, because I'm sure that it's impacted every one of you, and it certainly has impacted the work that we're doing at Greater Cleveland Partnership. So that backdrop is changing our landscape, and I'm sure will come out in some of our questions and answers. So you've all had an opportunity to read Team NEO's thoughtful report, Misaligning Opportunities. And it certainly highlights our region's racial disparities. So I want to throw out this first question to all of you, and it's, what value does racial and ethnic diversity bring to organizations? And Yentil, let's start again with you.
Yes, of course. So it's interesting even that we're beyond even having to prove the business case for diversity, because we know when we have a richness as far as within our culture of different races and ethnicities and those different perspectives, that we're able to see viable business results. We're able to see more innovation when we're able to actually respect those different ideas as well. When we get into the workplace, we're able to see more customer satisfaction, because we're able to actually reflect our customer base, especially ours within our stores, where we have a majority minority customer base. So we need that to be able to actually understand what our customers need both now and in the future. So racial and ethnic diversity is not a nice to have or a nice to do. It is a must have. It is a business imperative for companies to be able to sustain kind of meeting their goals in the short term, but also understanding the future of work, because we're moving towards a majority minority society. So this is why the inclusion perspective is also very important, because it's not enough to just have the richness and the diversity. It's important to make sure that their voices are heard. So not only do they have a seat at the table, but their voice is heard at that table and their ideas are implemented when we leave that table.
Yeah, and I think that business case is one that's been made for quite a while. And you know, there's obviously the research that bears that out, that businesses perform better financially. You know, back in 2015, McKinsey put out their kind of seminal report that really drew that out and focused on that business case. And so I think that's really important to stress. So let me go over to Aaron, same question.
Yeah, and I want to answer this question from a personal perspective as the CEO of our business, and one of our goals is to become a $1 billion company by 2028, and this is an important topic and an issue for us to really get behind, because I don't think we're going to get there if we're not diverse and inclusive with our workforce, because I think we can solve more problems. I think we can have access to more talent. You know, when you're trying to scale a business, and you in order to scale that business, you typically have to solve problems. And I think the best way you solve problems is through an inclusivity around thoughts and ideas and perspectives and experiences that all happen through different cultural experiences, through different personal life experiences. And I think having a diverse and inclusive workforce helps us accomplish that. And as you pointed out, you know, through the McKinsey report in 2017, you know, a diverse workforce, especially at the executive level, even there's a 33% increase in performance. There's a 67% of job seekers really are looking for a diversity in the employment, that the employer of choice that they end up choosing to work for. So I think there's a lot of data. There's a 1.7 times more likelihood of innovation when you have different thoughts and perspectives in the room. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity to, again, unlock potential when you have diversity and inclusivity in the room, in the workforce, and at your company.
Yeah. And Earl, certainly as head of HR, you're seeing a lot of this. And, you know, I think Aaron's point about being an employer of choice and making sure you're tapping into that potential so you can be as innovative as possible. So how might you answer that question?
I think I'd like to answer it in terms of aesthetics. If you think about the two analogies, in the early days of diversity efforts, the focus was on, if you will, the great melting pot. We bring all of these people together and we blend them into the organization in a nice and concise way. I don't know if you've ever done this before, but I have. I have melted a box of crayons. The color is unimaginably ugly, actually, at the end of the day. So if we can shift that focus away from the melting pot image to allowing people to self-express, to show up as their whole self, I liken that to a stained glass window. And if you've ever seen a stained glass window, you understand the art. You understand the fact that it's the colors, the different colors coming together that make that window so beautiful. And I think organizations that attenuate themselves toward having that kind of structure where people can not only show up every day and be their whole self, but be allowed to be themselves in that workplace, it becomes a much richer, deeper, more beautiful space. And people show up differently when they are given that permission space to be themselves.
And I think that Yentil from Sherwin-Williams can relate to highlighting all of the colors and their uniquenesses. And I don't know what it looks like when you put all the paint together, but I'm guessing it's similar to crayons. So
it's not pretty. It's not a color we sell.
No. All right. Well, Earl, let's stay with you. And what are some of the questions that HR leaders need to ask to really determine if their company is serious about diversity, equity, and inclusion?
I think it starts at the top. It starts with senior leadership that take it seriously. And it's not just about supportive leadership. It's participative leadership. It's people who put themselves out there, who have the self-awareness and the understanding of what it means to be vulnerable, to share their own difficulties, their weaknesses, their circumstances. Everybody has a story to tell. And if you listen long enough, it becomes apparent that we're not really all that dissimilar from each other. It's taking the time to do that. And I think in order for that to be effective, it can't just be, we have a diversity and inclusion or inclusion diversity program. It has to be a leader who gets into the fray and who really embraces that and becomes that role model for the rest of the organization to follow suit.
Yeah, I would also say from the HR leader perspective, always push, ask, what are our goals? What are we trying to achieve? But then most importantly, what HR leaders can do is say, how can I help us achieve these goals? What do I have control over? What do I influence in the hiring process? Who is being interviewed? If the names are appearing on resumes, the diversity of the interview, the people who are doing the interviews, diversity of the people that the candidates are meeting with when they're coming in, how the candidates are onboarded, especially if they are the only person of color coming into a team or a particular part of the organization. So that's where the HR leaders have a huge responsibility in really being like the executors of I&D and really seeing it through the entire candidate life cycle, because an inclusion and diversity program, can't just sit with the committee or the director or the chief or even the CEO. Everybody plays a part and a role in taking this seriously, in taking action and what they do about it every day.
Yeah, really starting at that very top level is what we've seen makes the difference. And so, Earl, you talked about these, the stories that people have to share and really being vulnerable. And I've been doing some reading on the importance of vulnerability, not only in your life, but, with your teams and with your staff, and how that does start to build that inclusive culture. And so I wonder from your perspective, I'm going to start with you, but ask the others this question. So where do you start with that? How do you start that equity and inclusion strategy and really start building up? Because these are people issues, and sometimes creating a strategy isn't as simple as perhaps some others. So where would you start, or where do you start?
Well, that's a great question, Gina, because that's kind of where we are right now. Delta had a diversity program many moons ago, and I think it probably lapsed due to lack of nurturing, probably due to lack of connecting the leadership to the rest of the organization and having everybody participate equally in the process. You start really by getting that senior leadership team to understand, here's the business case for why we should do this. And at the end of the day, businesses are in business for one reason, to make money. But also there can be the cultural factors of the common good and things like that. At the end of the day, they want to be a profitable organization. And in order to be a profitable organization, you have to have everybody rowing in the same direction. In order to get there, people need to feel like they're actually part of the system, that they matter to the system, that their roles matter. But you start with leadership understanding the business case. And from there, it can matriculate down the organization in a way that allows for everybody to jump on board and everybody to see, wow, there's value in getting to know each other. There's value in building up our teams and enhancing our ability to communicate with each other, to get along with each other, to understand each other, to show up every day and say, we're going to do our best work for the company. That starts with a leadership team that believes that it's necessary for us to do those things in order to be an effective company. And so where we are right now is we just begun the process of building an internal work team. And it is made up of people at all levels of the organization across a lot of different diversity angles, basically. And the intent behind this work team is to build programming, internal programming that will be eventually rolled out to the organization. But it is truly an of the people, by the people, for the people approach. And it has senior executive sponsorship. I am not the sponsor. I deliberately kept myself out of the mix because I didn't want this to be viewed as an HR program. I wanted it to be viewed as a company program that everyone can embrace and that everyone owns. And so that's the intent behind what we've done so far. And we're just going to continue to build this process out and to make sure that it stays on the rails, if you will, and grows and prospers.
Yeah, and I want to emphasize the importance of keeping the efforts and strategies embedded and embedded throughout the entire organization. Because if you keep it standalone, it's easier for people to, oh yeah, that's going on over there. But keeping it forefront and making sure that it isn't the DEI lead. Certainly they're the support and backbone, but how do you continue with that? And so, Aaron, you talked about the commitment that your organization has made to this. And so where are some of the places that you've started or some of the things that you started with implementing your DEI strategy?
Definitely. And like Earl, we are now more purposeful about this strategy. So for many years, just like as Earl mentioned, like we're in the business to make money. And as an entrepreneur, the initial side of this is to how do I stay in business? How do I thrive? And then how do I scale? And as we've reached some of those plateaus, as we continue to grow, we can become more mindful of this. But it really starts, as Earl mentioned, it starts with leadership. So I'm the one who is really leading this initiative within our organization. And the first step that I wanted to take is like, show me the data. Like, where are we at now within our environment? And fortunately, I mean, we're in a pretty good place. I mean, we're in a pretty good place from a gender perspective. We have 57% of our workforce, internal workforce, are women. But only 6% of our workforce is racially diverse. And so that's an area that we want to start to target. So to me, data is where it gives me the transparency to understand what are some of the strategies that we have to take to continue to evolve our diversity and inclusive goals. And so I've set those goals initially within our organization of what we want to accomplish. And then I work with our human resources team to start building out internal groups. Because again, as Earl mentioned, we don't want to make this just about at the C-suite saying this is what you're doing and that's it. It has to be a whole team that gets behind this. And again, fortunately, we do have different. We might not be where we want to be from a racially diverse culture, but we have LGBTQ. We have a lot of females, as I mentioned earlier. So we have people that come from different cultural backgrounds. So the goal is to get everybody to kind of get a group of that diversity together so that we can come up with strategies internally to promote different cultures and to create a safe work environment so that we get that power. We can then take that and market that externally so that we can start to open up the opportunities for people to know that we're a safe place to work. We're actually a really cool place to work. We're really doing great things, but we need multiple backgrounds to kind of help us, as I said earlier, because I think that's going to help us solve the future problems that will allow us to grow for the future. The other thing I'll mention too is that in some ways I look at it, I think of myself as holding a dual background. One is inside my company, but two is to all the companies that we talk to and that we work with here in our community. And I've always been this believer that I have to lead by example. I can't just talk about diversity and inclusion to our customers if I'm not living it inside of my business and showing them the things that we're doing. So that's a big part of this too, is that I am living this so that I can educate our customers and our prospects around the things that we're doing, and then hopefully influencing them to do the same.
I'm glad you touched on that, and I want to come back to that in a minute, but staying on the best place to start if you're implementing or wanting to implement a DEI strategy. And I know, Yentil, when you came in, you started to really dig in and do some assessing of the organization. I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about that and some things that you learned along the way and some next steps after you took from that.
Oh, absolutely. I spent my first year in a row, quite honestly, listening to our employees. So we have 61,000 employees around the world. So it was very much boots on the ground, whether it was employee forums where our CEO and I hosted around, hey, tell us what we should be doing. Tell us, how does it feel working for this company? And most importantly, what opportunities or solutions do you have? What are your recommendations? What would you like to see in a perfect world? Then also listening to kind of the leaders in the business and say, like, from a business perspective, like, what are the priorities? And I want to know what the priorities are even beyond the people part. Like, what is on your mind? So then being able to kind of bring both of those together, what we hear from our people based on the needs of the business, what are our priorities moving forward and what should our goals be? So we define those as being like education and training, and very intentional about saying education and training, because training is a single point in time, but education is something that's ongoing, that's embedded in communications, that's in conversations, that's in meetings, that's self-guided materials and resources that we provide, as well as truly emphasizing that leadership commitment. I believe it was like Earl who said it earlier, that it really does start with the top. The leader sets the tone. So having our CEO, our COO communicate it often and consistently, showing their support of it, showing their expectations also of all the other leaders in the company, saying that this is a priority for me, so I expect this to be a priority for you. As well as providing our employees, they said, a safe and brave space to kind of bring their full selves. We have a manufacturing kind of industry, so we do have underrepresented groups such as women and people of color and people LGBT. So we really started to enable our employee resource groups, and really expanding those so that our employees do feel more connected. But then when I say enable, I mean, how do we align those employee resource groups with the business priorities? Because the groups don't just have to do panels or lunch and learns. No, they can help onboarding new people of color to the workplace. They can provide mentorship. They can also help to solve business problems that, again, are even outside of the people management space. So it's all about kind of making those connections to the people in the business that's going to enable people to grow, while also equipping leaders with the right terminology, the things that they can do to best role model inclusive leadership. So we also rolled out inclusive leadership behaviors that we ask all of our leaders to role model consistently. And it's simply, we ask them to be open, be aware, be intentional, and be brave. And we try to put most things in that context so that it's reinforcement and they kind of know, the how. of like what their role is and how to engage people consistently, so that we can achieve our goals of driving employee engagement, increasing the diversity of our leadership roles, as well as attracting more people of color and women into our company.
Yeah, and it is that employee engagement, right? From the outset, you listened to the employees and what they wanted and took their voices and continue to use their voices as you move forward. And so, Erin, I want to go back to what you said about the importance of doing the work internally, but then as you're going out and doing some recruiting, how are you tying those things together and assessing the needs of the company you may be working with and the candidates? And you know, we know that the younger generation really is looking for a culture that is inclusive. And so how are you kind of balancing those two things together?
When we're working with prospective clients for the first time, you know, that has become one of the questions that we do ask as part of the onboarding part for us, is just understanding what their diversity and inclusion strategy is. Do they have one? You know, if they don't, you know, asking them that they're interested in some ideas or strategies around that, because we give them the positive aspects of a diverse and inclusive workforce, as we talked about with the first question you asked this morning. So, you know, the idea then is to hopefully make sure that when we're supplying potential talents to an opportunity, is to make sure that we are giving them a broad range of talent. In some will be, you know, diverse, obviously, you know, all of which are qualified, right, for the opportunity. But we want to be mindful that we're going out and doing the right work by trying to make sure we have a base of talent that's qualified, but giving them an opportunity to kind of pick and select from a diverse, whether it's diversity, racial diversity, or whether it's you know, females, whether it's, you know, whoever it might be. But we want to make sure that we're mindful to that. And that's the most important part. That's just not about just finding a qualified candidate as quickly as possible. It's making sure that we're mindful to giving them a range of qualified candidates to choose from. And honestly, I have a kind of a weird story about this too, because I was on the flip side of this. So I actually used an executive recruiter internally for a senior leadership position last year. And it was actually interesting to me because I was only getting white males that were sent to me. And I actually, and the recruiter I was working with, she's a woman, and she actually leads the American Staffing Association's diversity group. And I'm like, you know, where are the females? Where are those that are people of color? Like, where are those? And she actually looked at me, and she was struggling to identify those people. But I said, I'm not going to make a decision on this hire until you actually present me with qualified candidates that are that meet, you know, diversity requirements for me, for my objectives. And so I waited. She ended up finding some candidates, and two of them actually I hired. So I hired the one person that I wanted for the job, and I hired two additional people that were that met the other initiatives that I have around diversity and inclusion. But I had to actually force that. So when you talk about leading by example, I literally am living this. Like I want to make sure that we're doing the same thing that I'm asking to be done for me as an owner of a company. I want to be able to provide the same solutions to my customers as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of conversation about the pipeline. You know, where is, you know, I can't find any of fill in the blank. Pipeline
Right.
Versus what are your strategies to do the recruiting, and how much are you really diving deep into looking places rather than just putting a job description on a job board. So Earl, if you can talk about from an HR perspective, I don't know if you have some examples or ways that you're looking at doing some recruiting, and then our candidates, and this is a two-part question, and then our candidates asking about the culture of the organization once you've been able to bring them into your organization.
historically, and we do a little bit of this at Delta, historically I've dealt with smaller boutique firms when I'm looking for particular searches, because you have to start with the premise, to Aaron's point, I want a diverse slate of candidates. And if you can start with that and lay that out there for that firm in terms of the requirements, I think it makes it easier for you to begin to get what you ask for. I mean, at the end of the day, people often don't think about the diversity. They approach it from the standpoint of, well, this person has the skills that are required for the role. It just so happens that these are all, one-dimensional, if you will, in some respect. They're all white males, or they're all female, or, you really aren't able to get your arms around understanding who might be best suited for this role from the standpoint of what they bring as opposed to what their skills are. So I try to emphasize that at the outset. And then to the point of your second question, I do hear a lot, what's it like to work here? And I define that as the culture, because at the end of the day, that's what draws people to the organization. What drew me to Delta Dental is that there is just an incredibly collaborative framework set up where people want to support each other and they want to help each other. And I had just a tremendous outpouring from the senior leadership when I joined of, how can I help you? And how can I give you what you need in order for you to get up to speed on things? Now, if you had told me in January this year when I joined Delta that we would be in the middle of what we're in the middle of, obviously it would have given me pause, but I would have still said I'm in, at the end of the day. But you want to make sure that people understand what your requirements are at the beginning. And then you want to make sure that those people who are interviewing for your organization understand what they're stepping into and what it's like to work here. And if they don't ask, tell them.
Yeah, and you both talked about the diverse slate of candidates and making that a mandate or a goal. That is a strategy within your organization. And certainly, some refer that to the Rooney Rule because the NFL put that into place quite some time ago. And it is, explaining what is that culture like, and even looking at your job descriptions. Right? How are they steering you toward one type of candidate or the other, and going into that interview process and what that looks like. But then that onboarding. And so, Yentil, I don't know if you have stories about your process of onboarding and really emphasizing. You talked a little bit about that and making sure that people know, but do you have formal processes in place for that onboarding that really includes the emphasis on culture?
Oh, absolutely. Because this year, actually, we rolled out our internal culture initiative as a way to really show how important our culture is to our organization. So that is actually embedded into onboarding for all of our employees so that they understand, we are built on trust, execution, and also inclusion is a key value for us as one company and as one team. So that's also a place where employee resource groups play a role when onboarding new people in, because that provides a newcomer a safe space and a group of kind of buddies or mentors and peers that are going to help them navigate the culture as well. So especially as we're bringing in the underrepresented talent, it's also important to connect them to networks of people like them so that they can navigate and succeed within the company, because that emotional tax of being the only is the reason why at certain companies there's also a high level of turnover. When we only focus on the diversity piece, the representation piece, the recruiting piece, sometimes we lose out on the retention component of the conversation, which is also a reason why we're intentional about inclusion and diversity versus diversity and inclusion at Sherwin, is because that's a part of where we really emphasize the importance of our culture, which is a very strong 150-year-old culture that we want everyone to be able to succeed in.
And I'm sure we could each give examples of people who have interviewed for a position and they're excited about the position, but when they learn about the culture, it's like, yeah, I might love the position, but this is not going to be an environment where I can thrive. And so it really is starting with the inclusive culture piece so that you can attract and retain the top talent. And so we've talked a little bit about some strategies you can put in place, from the recruiting, the onboarding, even creating that culture. How do you measure whether you're successful? And I'd love to hear from all of you on this. How do you measure? What are those metrics? How do you know that things are getting better? So Yentil, let's start with you and we'll go around because I'm really curious about that.
Oh, absolutely. So you can do the traditional metrics as far as headcount, promotions, hires, turnover, but also looking at those, by gender, and also not just as people of color and minorities as one bucket. You have to look at each of those racial and ethnic groups separately. So you can see maybe where are the leaks in the pipeline, especially when you get to the differences in progression. You also want to look at if you're doing any type of employee engagement surveys. That's a huge measurement, and ensuring that there are questions on there specifically dedicated to inclusion and diversity and equity and employee perceptions of that. But then also looking at the overall engagement survey results by gender, race, ethnicity, and demographic, because that's going to help you identify, like, where are we missing people? Are they engaged and are they not? And, who is underrepresented? Which groups do we truly need to focus on? Because I always say strategy it's living and breathing document. It has to change with our environment, where Earl mentioned that 2020 has been a year for the books, and that's required a lot of shift in strategy, especially for us I&D professionals. So also being flexible, but using the data as a piece to continue to drive that by looking at, again, headcount, progression, turnover, and employee engagement survey data, but also getting down into the weeds. You could even look at it by age and generation, by gender, by race and ethnicity, even looking at it from the intersectional perspective on, again, are we losing people of color more often? Are we losing younger people of color, after 1 year in a row? So really starting to dig into that piece is crucial.
Yeah, really disaggregating that data and drilling down. And worked with one organization that actually has their employee engagement lead work with their DEI lead.
Yep.
And making sure that they are joined at the hip in everything that they do. And I think that's becoming more and more the norm. And even in the titles that we see, it might be head of equity and culture within the organization, and making sure that those are tied. And so Aaron, I'll go to you on that same question around measurement and metrics. How do you know you're moving forward?
So we're a much smaller organization. So we have roughly about 250 employees, but they're spread out throughout the United States. So, workplace demographics are obviously a big part of how we look at things. So we'll look at things holistically. So, like, for example, I said earlier, 57% of our internal workforce is female. But when you actually then start to break that down into pockets, so we have different operating companies within the Talent Launch Network, and we have different practice groups within those pockets, you'll start to see maybe an aggregation of all males or all females, or no diversity from a race perspective. So so we start to look at that more granularly, and then create strategies from that. And then, as Yentil mentioned, the employee surveys. So we survey the employees on a quarterly basis, and we make sure we're mindful to include questions that are about this topic. So, and that gives us a gauge of how the employees feel about the environment and whether we're performing in that way. The other aspect of this too is it's just not about what our workforce looks like from that perspective, but it's also the performance, as Yentil mentioned. So we want to gauge performance, we want to gauge career pathway progression, and so we are very mindful of that. And again, a lot of these initiatives really started to really come to the forefront because of this year, 2020, and so I think a lot of the this has been such a big topic of discussion throughout our country, and we've chosen to become very mindful of it. And so we've started to apply and adopt a lot of these strategies this year.
Yeah, the interesting thing that you said, I think some of the metrics are becoming more familiar in the industry, but the drilling down even by department and by manager level and going even deeper and seeing if you can identify where things are going really well and mine those lessons from that department. And, on the flip side, where do we need to maybe do some interventions in a particular department or not? And so, Earl, to use some measurements that we haven't heard, anything that you've put in place or seen in your organization of how you're measuring that success.
So first of all, I agree with both Aaron and Yentil that as a baseline, you have to have some way to measure your effectiveness quantitatively. But I think also there should be some emphasis on qualitative measures. When I walk into a room, a big office space, what do I see? Do I see collaboration? Do I see people teaming up and getting things done collectively? If I was a fly on the wall in a working session meeting, would I see people supporting each other and helping each other to come up with the best solution to the problem that they're dealing with? Those are the kinds of things I think that begin to let you understand how far you've come along that path to getting to where you actually feel like you need to be as an organization. And but at the same time, you need to be able to somehow quantitatively back that up, because at the end of the day, that's gonna help your senior leadership understand, yep, we're on the right track, we're moving in the right direction, or wow, we've got some holes in the framework here that we need to fill pretty quickly because things are not looking good. The other thing I think you need to understand is the Delta Dental did a Juneteenth tribute where we stood in solidarity for the amount of time that the officer in Minneapolis had his knee on George Floyd's neck. 8 minutes and 46 seconds, I think. It was an excruciatingly long, painful process. And it really emphasized the inhumanity of the act. But more importantly, we had to make sure that we were helping folks understand our approach to this wasn't that we were shunning the police or wanting to defund the police or anything. We had to be holistic in our conversation that says, we just believe that this was an injustice and we need to be better. We need to be better human beings. And if you can make those points clear, because everybody shows up differently when you think about those things, there could be people out there who said, well, wait, blue lives matter, all lives matter. And it was just really an opportunity for us to make the point that we were supporting better policing and trying to move people collectively in the same direction as an organization can be very difficult if you don't have clear purpose in mind and clear communications around that. So it's a learning journey that we're on, and we're going to continue to get better.
Can I add to that a little real quick? So, because Earl brought up a good point, and part of how we've worked is kind of the ready, fire, aim method. So, I don't believe in planning this out. I don't believe we look for postpone perfection before we act on things. So on Juneteenth, that was one of our ready, fire, aim moments. We kind of surprised everybody by saying we're going to take the day off. And we explained what the holiday was and what it signified and what it meant. But we, a lot of people had never heard of the holiday before. So that was an opportunity for us to educate our workforce. And that's kind of like, again, the start and leading by example of just getting people more educated on the different cultural experiences and backgrounds and our history. Because again, a lot of people don't know that that's a big significant part of history. And we wanted to acknowledge it in that way. So, sometimes I just think for people out there looking to create a diversity and inclusion strategy, it doesn't have to be planned out to perfection before you act. You can start acting day one.
So we're going to stay with that. This is going to be our last question, and I'd like each of you to touch on this. So, what we've seen going on in our country, we've seen a lot of statements coming out by companies and really seemingly starting to have this greater awareness about a lot of different areas around race and systemic racism. And how, leaders tend to be a little bit risk intolerant. And so coming out with statements like that and then following up with action and kind of, like you said, Aaron, kind of just going forward and not waiting too long and thinking too much about it. How do you get leaders on board with this if they may be hesitating? How do you make that case that, we need to stand behind this and then we need to do something about it, because it is a very outward facing projection of your organization?
Well, again, it's taking that, it takes that one person to take a risk, and then hopefully other people will be influenced to kind of follow suit. So in that moment the example I just gave, there were a lot of, I'm friends with a lot of business owners here in our community, and I wanted to talk about it and say, this is what we did and this is why we did it. And, some of it, I got some backlash from some people, or you're just, getting on the bandwagon here or whatnot. And I'm like, that's actually not it at all. I recognize that there is an opportunity for us to continue to evolve and improve as a society and as a community. And I do want to lead that. I may be white, but I'm also Jewish. I have a cultural background that would be considered a minority from that perspective. And I've gotten a lot of prejudice throughout my life and in college especially. And so I understand what that feels. And when you don't feel safe, you can't express yourself. You can't give everything of who you are to whatever it is you're doing. And I think Earl mentioned that at the beginning of his conversation today, is that, bringing your whole self. I want our community as a whole to come together as yourself and be able to express yourself and be able to be vulnerable about those types of things and not feel like you have to hide. Because if you have to hide, you can't give. And that's what really unlocks potential, when you can truly be who you are in any moment that you're interacting with others. And so I try to inspire other business owners that way, and to get people on board and really understand that this really matters. And I have a personal experience around it as to why it matters.
Yeah, it goes back to that vulnerability and building that trust, because that's how people start to be vulnerable. And there's a lot of history around the reasons why we don't have that. We have the mistrust. And so, Earl, to you, that same question about getting leaders on board to make bold steps. You talked about having that moment where you stood for the 8 minutes. And how did that come from the leadership top, or did you have to kind of make that case of why we need to do this? We need to make a stand.
Well, I think Aaron put it the best way, when it was really a ready, fire, aim moment. I mean, because it happened so fast, and it started with a question that someone had raised of, why can't we have that day off? And we have service level agreements and such, where we have government programs and things like that, where we have to have people at the phones in our call center and such. And that request came in, I think, a day and a half before the actual June 19th date. And so there was this mad scramble. It was like the Keystone Cops. I mean, I won't kid you, but in a good way, because people were approaching it from the standpoint of, yeah, you know what can we do? We can't give people the day off, but what can we do? And I would say that getting leaders on board and getting everyone rowing in the same direction is all about trust. And the only way you can build that trust is shots on goal. I mean, you just got to keep doing stuff. And people will, once they start to see, okay, you know what? That didn't hurt so bad, or that actually kind of felt good. It starts to build that momentum in the right direction. And you get people coming to you and saying, hey, we did this last year. What if we did this year? And if you can build that trust, it makes it easier to have those conversations. It makes it easier for me to approach Erin and say, Erin, tell me about what it's like to be Jewish. I don't have that perspective. Help me understand. And the more you can do that, the more, again, it's the vulnerability, it's the clear and candid honesty that you bring that builds the trust that you need to have further conversations about getting to know each other better and how we can work together more effectively. But it all starts with that trust, and you only get there by just doing it. You just got to get out there and do it. And there are times when you're going to fall flat. There are times when you're going to make a mistake. There are times that you're going to blush. But at the end of the day, you have to keep doing it in order to build that sort of mental muscle memory and resiliency to be vulnerable and to be open and to be honest and to just be out there. And you can get there. It just takes time.
Yeah, it's about those courageous conversations. And that's such a risk. And the number of people who have come to me recently and said, well, I don't know what to say. Right. And I'm sure
I don't want to say the wrong thing.
Don't want to say the wrong thing.
A closed mouth gathers no feet, that kind of a thing.
So absolutely, I'm going to use that one. But it is taking that risk. And so going out there and having that conversation and giving ourselves and each other some grace, right? Being aware that our intent is good, but also recognizing what that impact might be, positive or negative. So yeah, I really appreciate those comments. And Yentil, we'll wrap up with you, kind of balancing that and helping your leaders take that first step, whether it's a quick step or really helping them, pushing them forward. How have you gone?
No, absolutely. I mean, when we started sending out messages from our leaders, our CEO, that was a no-brainer. This was the right thing to do. It was about explaining that right now our silence is very loud and we have a responsibility to our people. And what we found is that, I started getting phone calls, colleagues started getting phone calls, and I tried to share that feedback. I'm like, here's what our employees are feeling. They are tired. They are stressed. Someone had to take today off because they could not cope with today's events. But then what I also had to do is kind of start to share my story. It's like, I am a Black woman, so I am tired. I almost took a few days off because this is exhausting to see people who look like us consistently face these type of injustices. So doing that helped to build the empathy amongst our leaders so they can understand that we have to take action, we have to act, and we have to do it now because timing is critical. We have to show our people that we are there for them and we support them, because when people are tired, when they're scared, when they're just frustrated and anxious, guess what? They're not bringing their full selves to work. They're not being productive when they come to work. They're not providing good service to our customers. They're not even able to pay attention to all the safety parameters, let's say, within our plants, because their mind is just fogged and just trying to sort out what's going on and trying to conceal that when they come to work. So we're very intentional about saying it's okay to talk about this at work. And if you are scared of saying the wrong thing, here's some tips. Here's how to approach these conversations, as we say, across differences, about differences. Be curious, offer support, just listen to understand. Don't try to rationalize, don't try to problem solve, but listen to understand. And also, here's what Black Lives Matter means. Here's who George Floyd is. Here's what Breonna Taylor represents. Here's what Ahmaud Arbery represents, so that these people and these concepts and what racism means, so they become less of big and broad and kind of heavy concepts that they're just seeing in the news, where they're just seeing things on fire and these names and things attached to them, where it becomes harder to talk about it. So we tried to take the sting out of it. We tried to provide context and education around, here's what it means, and here's how you can respond. Here's how you can offer support. But then also for our people of color, it was, it's okay to share your story. we see you, we hear you, because the biggest gap when it comes to companies even rolling out these initiatives or even engaging, especially people of color and our Black people, our Black communities, our Black employees, is we have to be intentional about seeing and hearing them, because it's all started because this community has felt like they haven't been seen or heard or cared for before. So it's all about bridging those gaps so that we can kind of work towards this together, because it's going to take allies, taking action to learn from and to show empathy about the different experiences. And it's going to have to take me as well, being comfortable telling my story at work, sharing my story at work, saying I am no different than Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery could have been one of my best friends, so that we continue these conversations, because I have been consistent at saying, like, this is not a moment, this is a movement. These are the start of conversations. Get comfortable getting uncomfortable. We have to build this muscle, just like we had to learn how to do anything else. We have to learn how to do this. These are new uncharted waters, but I'm going to give you some tips and tools to help you do so. So we also had a full toolkit that we provided for our organization, with FAQs, how to approach conversations across differences, our inclusive leadership behaviors in this context, as well as, some ways to really make sure that the conversations across differences are productive at the end of the day. Because even if we have different opinions, does not mean we have to leave the conversation as enemies. You can easily leave as friends. So it's all about providing that education and that safe and brave space for people to share, if they're feel helpless and don't know what to say, or if they're like, I'm just tired, I feel alone and don't know what to do. It's about providing that space, but then also the tools that can help people to talk about it effectively at work.
Great way to wrap it up. We talked a lot about vulnerability and taking those risks, creating those spaces and taking action, really, and that empathy and sticking with the topic. I really like what you said, Yentil, to wrap us up, is this is about systemic racism, and you need to stay in that discomfort so that we can move forward. So I knew that we would hear a lot of great experience, expertise, and wisdom, and I want to thank all of you for helping us out with that and helping our audience learn a bit more about how to create that inclusive culture. So thank you all.